How's it going, YouTube? Come today with another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is going to be Chimera. This is a deck that we've seen fall off pretty hard lately, but I really want to make sure that everyone understands this deck is still going to be able to do really well. It's a mid-range deck, so you have to realistically change out your non-engine. I think that's going to be really important as well. Today, we're going to be talking about branded Chimera, more of a pure variant of Chimera with Horus cards, and then also Tri-Mera. So I know everyone's been asking for the update lately. We are going to cover that. If you haven't checked out any of my sponsors, check them out down in the description below. I really do appreciate each and every one of you for being here. We're on our way to 30,000 subscribers, so definitely smash that sub button if you haven't already. Like the video, and without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about some Chimera. I love the fusion mechanics, so you already know I'm going to love this deck even more the more that we were able to deck build and the more that we're able to theory into a new format. I think this deck just becomes progressively better, but we will talk about why that is. I'm going to end with my personal build, and we're going to start with the branded Chimera build. Not a whole lot has changed post Agov. I think that's really important to point that out. I think the branded Chimera build is realistically going to be more of a linear build, so I really wouldn't try to be playing anything too fancy in this, because the whole objective of the deck is to realistically just put up the same line over and over with a lot of interruption and be able to stop your opponent with things like Guardian Chimera, the Sword Knights Engrave, the Codals Engrave, Super Poly. I think this is a build that really does a good job at just making sure that your opponent doesn't play when you start. But I do think that there are other ways you can play this deck that are really effective and a little bit more combo, which can also be very productive as well. This is a deck that a lot of people tend to struggle against because of the fact that you do get the hand rip and there is a lot of interruption. And then you also have to deal with the Guardian Chimera. We have seen a lot of people use cards like Spellbound to counter this, so your opponent cannot use the monsters on board. One of the bigger things that you really have to do against this deck is realistically just side in Dust or Lightning Storm, and you're in a really good spot. Forcing out the fusion spell early makes your opponent go into some pretty suboptimal plays, but you also have to realize this deck typically summons Dragoon pretty easily, so that's something that you're really going to have to watch out for. If you are a graveyard-centric deck, you have to understand as well that End of Anubis is a very common card right now in the sideboard of most builds, because the new Dark Ruler fusion allows you to go ahead and just dump it to the grave and then revive it with the Phantom Beast. So definitely a very scary card. We had talked on stream about Invader of Darkness. If Runic gets really popular, then sure, you can play it, but right now it's not very good. I wouldn't play it. We'll talk about the Barrier statue here in a little bit as well, because it's an interesting card. But overall, I do think that playing like the Radians in the main deck are still fine. It really does help you out with like your Pearly matchup. I'm still on Xyz Encore. I like the card a lot. I'm still going to play that card. It really helps you out in multiple matchups, even Unchained when they put up the Caesar. So definitely something to consider. I really like that card though. Light Hexio, I feel like it's just mandatory in this build because Dragoon's still very strong. Super Poly is a card where I'm actually siding the Draco Knight. You have to play this card when there's so much Vanadium right now. If Vanadium dies out, then sure, you don't have to. But even we were just playing on stream a game against Vanadium. It was game 2, and I just slapped Super Poly down and pitched Nessie out of my hand in tier, and it was an auto win. This is a card that I definitely like having around. If it's between this or Guilty Gearfruit, I'm probably picking this one because we haven't really seen Rescue a whole lot. Like, after a lot of people started targeting that deck, it hasn't really performed that well, which is definitely interesting because the deck took a crazy amount of spots in Indy, and then we hit Richmond, and the deck was like nowhere to be found. But I think once a lot of people understood what the deck did and prepared for it, it became a little less good, and that's why Unchained did really well, because even if you are prepared for Unchained, it can still be a pretty rough matchup for a lot of decks. So definitely very interesting to see, but Draco Knight is a very important card to have around, especially when Vanadium is around. Even with the Centurion deck, I believe Draco Knight's still going to be pretty good. Don't quote me on that, but I do believe that it's still going to be pretty fine into that matchup as well. But moving off of this build is going to be Tri-Mera. I do think that branded Chimera is still fine. I think it's probably the weakest build right now just because of the fact that it's so linear and the plays are so low ceiling that you can't really get away with a whole lot of innovation or playing through many boards because it's all very basic interaction. I do like the Tri-Mera idea here because of the fact that you can open up realistically any 2 monsters for the most part, obviously excluding like hand traps, and you're able to just go ahead and rip the Chimera Fusion right away. So you need a Beast or a Fiend to do this. So if you have the kit in your hand, if you have the Sword Knight, the Codal, you can use so many different combinations for the Beast, the Fiend, or Illusion for the Phantom Beast. And then the Phantom Beast can go ahead and just dump a kit to the graveyard, which is really neat. And that's a really cool way to start your playline. There's a play earlier with 2 Codals, and we went Codal Search Berfomet, Fusion, send Codal and Berfomet, and then made Dark Ruler. And then Dark Ruler dump kit, and then Berfomet tried to summon back one of the Codals. We got impermed and then chained the other Codal to stop the imperm. So it was like a really clean line around imperm, and we were able to go full combo through that. So definitely very cool, and I think that the Dark Ruler adds quite a lot to this deck. Then having SP, of course, is just ridiculous. It's very, very good. I still think the deck's very cool. One thing that you really have to realize, though, is that Berfomet does lock you into fusions for the rest of the turn. So one play that's really clean that you can do, because you do need to summon 4 monsters unless you just like actually make the Link 2 instead of using the effect for Link 2, so you don't have to summon 4 monsters, is that you go ChainLink 1 Sword Knight, ChainLink 2 Revolt. So the Sword Knight's off the board, and now you can summon the 4 monsters to the board, and then make Omen, and then you will resolve the Sword Knight to summon the Berfomet. So now you can use Omen to banish, and then Berfomet to search, and now you're fusion locked. So that's definitely something that you have to think about with chain links to get around that situation. You also can Fairy Jet summon the Claw out of your hand, which is very cool. It's another really nice interaction. Something that came up earlier too, remember that this card can also play around skill drain, because you can send your card to the grave for cost, and then you can return something. So this actually comes up quite a bit. So like if you have like Guardian Chimera that you summon off of a fusion and you already have Ancient Warrior up, then you can go effective Guardian Chimera, and then you can use Double Dragon Lord to send Chimera under the skill drain. Even if it doesn't resolve, the Guardian Chimera will, because now it's off board. So definitely some really cool interactions. The next thing though is that looking for a way to combo out of really awkward situations, having a Karis in hand is really nice, because Karis can send a Winged Beast, a Beast Warrior, or a Beast, so you also can send Claw out of your hand. I cut Claw down to 2 just because you don't really want to hard open this card. It's nice to open, because if you open this with Fusion and something else, you get a free search, which is also really nice. But at the same time, it's just not something I want to see multiples of. I want to see more of my engine versus just like the same engine. So the other thing too is I actually bumped Tenki up to 3 with the 3 Fractal as well. I think Droll is really popular right now, but it's also becoming a little less popular. We're also siding the cross out, so we have other answers to it too, which is fine. I think this is really solid though. Playing the 3 talents, I know this seems a little egregious, but it has come up quite often because this deck has so many points of interaction for your opponent to just do anything to. So at that point, I think that it is important to have a card to just have a nice answer for those situations. But now moving on to my personal build of Chimera right now. So I'm actually on the Horus cards. So this is something that I actually was talking with multiple people about, and I was saying how I didn't really think these were that good. And, you know, it's one thing where in theory things cannot be that good, or in testing at one point they're probably not that good. But the more that you work with them and the more that you really try to figure out like what is going to be the best to play, I think that you can definitely find new theory and new logic to run cards. So that's one thing where you should never feel like you can't add cards to your build after you say something's bad, or like change your opinion on them, because that's how Yu-Gi-Oh just is, right? It's just like a bunch of ideas that seem bad at one point that are just amazing at a different point. And that's why cards like Vanity's Emptiness, when it released, was like 2 cents, and then months down the road it was $40 for a common, right? So it happens, and it will happen more so in the future, I'm sure. So moving forward though, talking about the build, the Horse cards are very cool. Another card I want to bring up here is Master Tao, the Chanter. This card is really crazy. If this card is sent to the grave, you can target an illusion and special summon it. So this is really nice, especially in unison with Imseti, because of the fact that you can go Imseti pitch this, and then this can reborn like a Sword Knight, which is really nice. There's also multiple playlines too, where like you can send this off of Dark Ruler, and then this can reborn a Sword Knight. I've also had lines where this reborn like a Kodal, and then I'll just like use the Kodal and something else to make like an SP. So definitely a couple really nice things this card can do. You cannot special summon monsters from the graveyard for the rest of the turn except illusions after you use this, so definitely keep that in mind. But the card itself is pretty cool. It's also like a really odd counter to tier if they mill 5, right? And you mill this in Sword Knight, and you're just like, nice. So then you're like reborn, and then they have to burn a Shuffler on you, which is really cool. Again, siding the end of Anubis, siding the Draco Knight is still really important. I am playing the Xyz Encore because I still think it's very good to run. I'm playing the Barrier Statue. I'm still very indifferent about this. I think it's very good. I think it's very bad at the same time because there's a lot of matchups, obviously, where dark monsters are just everywhere, and so this just never mattered. But there's also a lot of matchups where there's not a whole lot of dark monsters in the deck, maybe even at all if you're playing against like Rico or what have you. So I think that it's definitely an interesting card to play in the deck. You don't have to run this. I'm still running this though. You can run like one talent in the main deck, so when you side and cross out, it's another target. But overall, I think this is definitely fine just to run at one. Just from a lot of theory, a lot of testing. It's definitely something that can just auto win you the game outright. The other thing too is I'm playing the Dumatef. This card's a beast, so it's better than Happy for that regard. It's also really neat too, and something that you really should consider. Now, this is probably something that may not have crossed your mind, but this actually came up at locals and whatnot too. When you activate King Sark and you have even Happy Engrave and Imseti, and you control no monsters, please do me a favor and just summon the Imseti first. Because it is a dark attribute monster, you won't get Bishled because you summoned that one first, and they cannot Bishel the Dumatef for the Happy. Just summon Imseti first. That is something that a lot of people don't catch, but definitely just play around the Bishel, even if you don't think it's there. It's still very important. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video because these are definitely some very cool builds. I like this build a lot right now. It's been doing really well. I'm playing the Photon in the extra deck as well, if you're curious what this was. Because if you have the Sword Knight and the ability to go into this, then you can at least stop an Ash Blossom, which is also really cool. And then also the Zombie Vampire, so you can at least try to reborn out your Sword Knight or a Baphomet from your deck when you mill. So also pretty ideal. But again, I do hope that you enjoyed because I love this deck still. It's still something that I'm interested in playing. And there's a lot of ways to play it. So definitely let me know if you come up with any cool tech cards, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.